Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the pomp and ceremony are over, and now it's down to business for Governor Tom Corbett. He's number 46. A trio of Pennsylvania's leading journalists will analyze the prospects and the program of the incoming governor, Pennsylvania politics and government, in depth and in detail. And guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, the Corbett administration is in place, or at least mostly in place. He's set for a very ambitious agenda. Some have called it transformational. We shall see. Joining me to assess the early days of this administration are some frequent guests on the program. Sitting on my right, figuratively speaking, that is Scott Detrow from Pennsylvania Public Radio. Across the way is Amy Worden with the Philadelphia Inquirer and John Micek with the Allentown Morning Call. That was only figuratively, I suppose. I said figuratively. You got it. All right, let's talk about this. Let's first of all talk a little bit about the inauguration. Spend a few minutes. This took place, on Tuesday of the past week. John, let me start with you. Weather wasn't the greatest, not the largest crowd. You had some demonstrators there. But the governor, in his speech, certainly, though he didn't get specific, laid out a new direction. Am I right or am I wrong?
No, absolutely. I mean, there was if you looked at the text and almost looked at the text, I mean, there were broad and overarching themes. There's shot through with some optimism, saying wouldn't accept the word impossible, believed in the possible. Did hint, though, at the changes that are to come. Said that he had to reform government first before he could start fixing the state's very real fiscal problems. So, yeah, it is definitely a new tone and definitely a new direction.
Amy, what did you get out of this speech?
Well, definitely more subdued than his predecessor. It was a little shorter
12 minutes,
overall.
I think, something like that. I wasn't counting, but somebody said,
I think,
you got 15, okay.
We got some hints as to where he's going. For instance, with the business community, he said, it's time to, and with education, he said it's time to embrace innovation.
Right.
Sort of some
translation,
broad,
school choice there, maybe.
Exactly,
we can get into that
exactly, yes, and with the business community as well. I think actually Lieutenant Governor Cawley was perhaps more specific, saying Pennsylvania is going to be open for business.
Yeah, in his speech, and I'll go to Scott in a minute. In his address, I don't know if you covered that. I thought he was much more specific than the governor was. I stood in the back of the chamber for a few minutes and caught some of it. Well, he was more specific, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah,
well, there also weren't people booing over him, so maybe you just heard it better.
That's true.
That was that was an interesting contrast. Cawley did get into the nuts and bolts of business reform, he talked about tort reform, he talked about lowering the state's tax structure. So a lot of nuts and bolts from Cawley. Corbett, if you read between the lines and if you followed the campaign, you saw where he was kind of hinting at. I think the only real specific policy that we got from Corbett's address, and it wasn't too specific, it was just the word choice in his sentence about education reform, and that was kind of a nod to the vouchers issue that's going to start.
Amy, do you think he's going to jump right in? I mean, there are two things where we can talk a little more in detail about it. School choice and sell the liquor stores. He's serious about these, isn't he? Right. I mean, a lot of times you talk about them, and we've heard these before, but this huge push on this.
Yeah, it's interesting, but remember, these are not new ideas. Both of them were recycled from the Ridge administration, and actually privatizing liquor stores goes back even further.
Yep.
With his allies in the Senate, the Senate Republicans have already, slapped a number one on the school voucher bill, so they're ready to roll on that.
John, you wanted to...
Yeah, no, I mean, I ran into Mike Turzai, the House Majority Leader, in the halls after the speech, and he, Mr. Turzai shepherded the liquor privatization bill in the last term last year. He's gearing up already for this. I mean, both the House and Senate are poised to act on this. And back to the Cawley speech for a minute. I mean, I thought they were really interesting bookends, one being the view from sort of 100,000 feet, one being the view from 50,000 feet.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the function of the speeches too. Is kind of thinking about that. Does the governor's speech more the vision thing, whereas Mr. Cawley as the LG as the point man can maybe get into a little bit more.
I mean, typically the budget address is where we'll get to the specifics. I mean, this was not an unusual speech in that way.
That's right. Wow, I think I caught a cold out in that freezing cold inauguration.
Didn't we all?
March 8th is going to be the budget address. It's pushed back a month because it's a new governor. But on these two big issues that we're going to spend a lot of time covering, liquor privatization and the school choice issue, I think we need to remember that just because Republicans control both chambers doesn't mean it's going to shoot through and get automatically signed. These did not get done in the 90s, and I've been talking...
And when the Republicans controlled the General Assembly then.
Right, and I've been talking to kind of the opponents of both these things just to hear what their argument's going to be. They're kind of honing their message. The public school advocates who oppose vouchers, one thing I've heard from many that I've talked to is kind of this talking point that, well, it actually removes choice from the process because you're handing this over to private schools and they can choose not to admit these students or not. So that's one argument you're going to hear a lot of.
All right, let's run to a break, and we come back. Let's sort of take up, some of these big items that he's talked about during the campaign. I want to talk about, let's first get into legislative reform. This has been talked about now for an endless period of time. Both chambers are sort of toying with different aspects of it, and we'll go through some of those items. We'll be back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the incoming Corbett administration and where it might go with a trio of Pennsylvania's leading journalists, Scott Detrow, Amy Worden, and John Micek, journalists all. All right, Amy, I didn't lie, but before we get to legislative reform, let's talk about, I always tell the truth on this program. I'm not sure all my guests do, but I do. No, I'm just kidding. Wow. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're having a little light moment on the program. All right, Amy, let's talk a little bit about school choice. What is school choice?
Yeah, well, loaded words. Loaded words. Basically, the proposal as it is right now in Senate Bill 1 is that it would actually, for phase 1 in a 3-year program, it would set aside, essentially take money, the public money that goes to an individual pupil to pay their public school education, and allow that child and their family to choose another public school or private school or parochial school.
Now, one of the controversies at the beginning, they're just doing with go ahead.
They're focusing on low-income families. You have to have a certain percentage of the poverty level, about $28,000.
And with low-performing schools.
And low-performing schools. And then it would expand from there.
Okay, it gradually expands. If I have it correctly, then in year 2, it's low-income students it's a district-wide thing, right? And then year 3, it's just across the board, any low-income student, whether your school's great, whether your school's failing, across the board. So that's another thing that opponents are saying. Look, what are the restrictions on this bill? All of a sudden, it's going to expand and expand and expand. Yeah. How much is this going to get cost? Yeah. It's also important to point out that they want to take the money from the basic education subsidy. That was the top issue during the Rendell administration. So that's another sign that this basic education subsidy, whether it's chopped up to go to vouchers, whether it's just reduced in the budget process, is going to be a big victim when in the past 8 years it's been priority 1A.
Yeah. Now, we do have charter schools in this state. We also have, Governor Rendell has put a lot of interest in pre-K and early childhood education, correct? But there's no we don't know yet if there will be increases recommended, particularly in education, which is what, about 35% of the budget?
If I had to guess, I'm sure not. The way they talked on the campaign trails, at least for the basic subsidy and being carved up, or maybe at least flatlined to those districts. This year, then candidate Corbett on the campaign trail talked a lot about the importance of early childhood education and funneling money into that. Whether that translates into an actual funding increase in a year, whether they've been talking about across the board cuts is anyone's guess.
Go ahead.
And what's interesting too is that the supporters of this proposal, who are both Democrat and Republican right now, although there's certainly going to be opponents from both parties as well, are already saying, 24 hours into the new administration, that the 8 years of Rendell and all the money spent on education, in their minds, has not really paid off.
Paid off. So this is, but it's going to be a major point of contention. But all three of you would agree, this is going to be a top priority. Yes.
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 Sure.
Yes?
Yes, and to add in there, I think if we're talking about what areas are going to get slashed or not, it looks like a lot of Republicans are okay with keeping the early childhood education funding kind of in place. They're going to look other places.
And Governor Corbett, during the campaign, talked about that.
Yeah, he said that that's something he'd like to continue.
Okay, but now we'll go to a break, and now when we come back, I will tell the truth. We'll do legislative reform,
supposedly,
and we'll start with John Micek on that. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
All right, welcome back to the program. Let's talk about legislative reform. It's a top priority. The Governor Corbett said on day one, and then his administration said within a week. But there is, John, a lot of conversation, more than usual, about legislative reform. Yes?
Yeah, so far it's conversation. The House last couple of weeks ago, as they were getting their internal operating rules together, started talking about requiring lawmakers, just like everybody else in the universe, to submit receipts for their hotel and meal expenses when they're on state business, about eliminating the state-funded car leases and making them pay 1% of salary toward health care reform. That was supposed to be incorporated into the internal operating rules before session resumed. That's not happened yet. So far, that's just conversation. Talking with the Corbett people yesterday, they're saying, well, they're supposed to be day one, then it was the first week to 10 days, and now they're saying, well, wait a second, the House and the Senate are talking about this, so maybe we can roll some of that stuff into what we want to do. So the fervor for reform has sort of incrementally slowed down a little bit, but they are having the conversation.
Amy's smiling there.
It's just funny because we've been Corbett talked about it on the campaign trail, and of course we've heard a lot about it in the legislature, with special committees formed and everything to focus on this. And yet, when the chips are down, and they came out the House 2 weeks ago now, ready. They thought, the House Republicans thought they were ready to roll out their new plan, and the Democrats said, no, not so fast. We have some issues. So that's where we are right now. Deadlock.
Right. And I did go back and check, and in one of the final campaign commercials, you have Corbett saying, on the first day, I'm going to put out this legislative plan. And I guess first day was maybe a metaphor, maybe a bit looser, because
well, maybe
waiting for the details.
There was still a lot of stuff in boxes. It might have been around there somewhere.
Supposedly.
Well, no, but the other thing was that on one level,
he forgot to
he's got the legislature now talking about it. I mean,
they're talking about it. That's the thing. And
I get a little skepticism.
It's like the weather.
Well, let me tell you this.
I get a little skepticism on your part here about
legislative leaders were very willing to come up to reporters and tell us how they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And now, a week later, when we call them and say, hey, what's going on with those reforms, suddenly they're not as willing to talk about them. So we'll wait and see the details.
So you're not sure it's business as usual. It may be. You're not sure yet, right?
That's the problem.
All right, you're all from Missouri. You're not from Pennsylvania. You're going to wait to see it, right?
Show me.
All right. Well, let's run to a little break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the liquor stores. Another big proposal. It also is controversial. It has its supporters and its opponents. It also has been tried before. Governor Thornburg, I think, tried it twice, and Governor Ridge tried it once, but never before was it tied to the fiscal realities of the situation, which may make a more compelling reason. All right, no cynicism aside, we'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, welcome back. Well, we're running through on the program the proposals that Governor Corbett has made. He talked about a lot of these throughout the course of the campaign. Legislative reform, we will see. There's some skeptics about how much the legislature will do. Before I get to liquor stores, but there's no talk really about reducing the size of the legislature, right?
I think seriously no. Various leaders, Corbett has given a nod to, I'd support a limited constitutional convention, as have the House and Senate leaders, but I haven't seen anyone saying we're going to start that process right away and get going.
And Amy, nothing about going to part-time. They're full-time, as everybody knows, but part-time, that's come up intermittently, but you don't hear much about that, correct?
They are part-time, Terry. Where have you been?
Oh, they are part-time, meaning that they work, they come in. I got it. Hey, now you sound like Governor Rendell. Remember, Governor Rendell would accuse them, and you would write about this.
They talk about it in the same way they speculate what they're going to have for lunch. I mean, it gets. I mean,
but they actually have lunch. That's
true.
Yeah, okay.
But without receipts.
All right. Well, let's talk now about the liquor stores. This proposal, as I indicated before, has been made by a number of past governors. Basically, Scott, lay out the proposal.
The proposal is to sell off the licenses that are currently held by state-owned liquor stores, to privatize the process. Representative Turzai has pushed for this in the past. Now that he's leading the House as majority leader, he says that it's going to get going. He has said it's going to bring in $2 billion. I'm starting to hear a lot of grumbling from lawmakers and various interested parties saying, yeah, we don't think $2 billion is actually the figure. If that happens, if it becomes clear that it's a less number, I think that's one real chink in the momentum of this bill. But the basic argument here is that just like the budget crisis last year opened the door for table games when that hadn't happened before, it's the thought of, okay, this is a way to get more revenue, to get $1 billion, $2 billion without having to cut projects that's been around for decades. It's kind of an easy way to get that gap filled. Easy until you think about the fact that unions and other interest groups are going to get very aggressive. The Post-Gazette had a story this week about union groups meeting and saying they're going to declare war on the Corbett administration. They will be very, very vocal during this process.
And Corbett can't even count on the full support of his own party. I mean, you're going to have social conservatives and
Mothers Against
MAD who are going to coming out saying this is going to increase access to alcohol for minors. That there's going to be DUI rates are going to go up. So I mean, there's that whole argument as well.
But we're only Amy, one of two states that have a wholly owned, both the wholesale and retail operations owned, and he does have a pretty good legislature, meaning larger majorities than we've seen in recent history.
Right. Well, one interesting point that John Jones made, who was the chairman of the Liquor Control Board under Ridge, is that there was no constituency for privatization. That is, if you take a poll, or if you look at my newspaper website or something, anytime we run a story about privatization or anything, or wine kiosks or anything involving booze, the hits, it skyrockets. Everybody's interested. Everybody thinks the current system is
no big constituency
isn't working and is archaic, but there isn't a natural constituency. There isn't a single block of people.
That's true, but now the Corbett administration will say there is a compelling reason to do it, and it's fiscal.
Right.
Correct?
Right, because even though tax receipts continue to come in above projections, it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar deficit because of a variety of factors, including the disappearance of stimulus funding. That automatic $2.5 billion hole, you got to find the money somewhere, and that kind of greases the wheels for projects that have been held up in the past.
If I recall, at no time when it was brought up in the past was it directly tied to a fiscal crisis. And John, do you think that will be the major argument that the administration will use?
They're going to make the fiscal argument, and they're going to make the consumer argument as well. They're going to try to sell this to people as an easier and more customer-friendly way to do this. The opponents cheaper way to do it. The opponents, though, will come back with the argument that for the last 7 or 8 years, the LCB has kind of shed its kind of East German image, and become more consumer-friendly with wine and grocery stores and the beer and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but we've talked about. I mean, I had a colleague of yours, Robert Swift, on couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about it, and he made argument. He said there are lots of parts of our state that are still dry, and as you point out, lots of opposition to extending this. You know, there are over 600 retail outlets. How that all gets massaged and dealt with is going to be fairly complicated.
But I'll make this point, and Amy makes a good point, that this doesn't automatically translate into political capital and political momentum, but I'm a Pennsylvania transplant. I've never met a person who came into the state, whether they were visiting or just moved here, who wasn't totally flabbergasted by the way that wine and beer are sold here.
Yeah. You know, so your point is, I mean, their point would be get into the whatever century, the 21st century, right, with this.
Late 20th at this point, I think is where they would be.
Late 20th century. All right, in about the 2 minutes that we have left, let's sort of end on this. Tom Corbett has these huge majorities. The Democrats are virtually powerless, John, if the Republicans stick together, as we saw during the Ridge years. Does this mean most of this agenda sails through? Does it mean early budgets? None of those, no 8 budgets without, you know, getting done on time. What's your sense about what are the Democrats going to do throughout this process? Just stand around and say, what do we do next?
I mean, I assume that the Democrats have a head on their shoulders that they will try to make as much noise as humanly possible and throw as many spitballs at the Corbett proposals as they possibly can. I don't think that just because there are huge GOP majorities in the House and Senate, that means the trains are going to run on time necessarily. I mean, keep in mind, we're talking about a budget potentially where there's going to be just wholesale gutting of programs. Right. Each of those programs have constituencies. Some of them even have Republican constituencies. It's not going to be easy.
Good point. Go ahead.
And one thing I've been saying is you have to remember, on the national level, 2 years ago this week, we were talking about how President Obama was going to totally run the table with his huge Senate and House Democratic majorities. They had 59 at this point. Democratic senators, and they got a lot of stuff done, but Republicans were very effective in slowing things down.
Well, Amy, you cover your paper, the Philadelphia suburbs. I mean, there will be some Senate Republicans from the suburbs. Go ahead, finish my thought.
Who might very well align with Democrats on some of these issues. So there could be, you know, it might not be by party. It will be by geography.
All right. Well, look, a great update on some of these things, and I will qualify my statement. My guests always tell the truth. How's that?
And we're also journalists.
And you're also you're not reporters. What are you? Journalists or reporters?
There was some skepticism about that fact from you.
Skepticism early in the show. All right. Well, it's been a great update. All right. Thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.